See, I told everyone that I'm quackers.
This is my Ertl AMT refit. She is 36 years old, would you believe it or not. She's having something of a restoration. Unfortunately, some of the details that I documented while refurbishing her I have lost. I've used and using pearlescent transitional lacquers. I'm using a combination of All-Clad and Vallejo. I've also got a new set of lacquers in the lineup, and they are the Australian SMS, and they're really iridescent. I don't intend, oops, I don't intend for this rebuild to be super accurate or anything like that. It's not possible. She's more of an exercise of bringing her into the 21st century using all the techniques that I've learned from when she was first built. You can see how those lacquers iridesce. All of this has been hand masked, none of it. I've not used any over-the-counter or online masking systems. I've done this the traditional way, so to speak, by using masking tape. I think the primary goal really is to realise my aspirations as a child and a young teen way back then, in terms of having a satisfactory model. I have a 1/350 scale, so she's going to be my classic motion picture Enterprise, whereas this is going to be the Star Trek for the Voyage Home iteration. The lower saucer has as many transitions as the top. I've actually polished a lot of this because sometimes the lacquers can cause ridging, or you get a stepped effect in your paint as opposed to it going down flat. So I just polish some of that ridging out. I mean, it's not a big deal. So that has left me now with an even surface to apply other lacquers and the Aztec patination. You can see some detail here. This is my principal foundation, so to speak. You can really see that iridescence, the transition. It's really, really quite beautiful. This model's been with me most of my adolescent and adult life, and I'm determined to preserve her and bring her up to a standard, as I said, that I would be pleased with as a child. So she doesn't by any means represent all of my skills as a model maker. My humble skills as a model maker, I should say. So we're in a stage now where we're tidying up loose ends, so to speak. I'm still patching up the damage from the time when things just went so wrong, seriously wrong. The interplanetary deflector dish and housing, that's all been masked off using masking tape. And the dish itself, I've actually used milliput to give the impression that it's more recessed, if that makes sense, than it was on the original model. I used milliput to build up the circumference of the dish to give it a greater appearance of it being recessed. The original surround is actually quite flat, so that gave me a good platform then to add the milliput and sculpt it, creating a look that I'm more pleased with, so to speak. The weapons bay, that is not an accessory that I bought. I actually built this from scratch using very fine styrene rods, because it's almost like a fillery or a cage like effect, if that makes sense, or look. Or scaffolding might be a more appropriate description, because it does look like some sort of scaffolding, especially on the close-ups. Yeah, so the accessories that you can buy online are solid transparencies, whereas this is not. This is completely scratch built, and it has those sort of details that more authentically represent the on-screen model. But as I said, I'm not trying to make an exact copy of what's there. This is an amalgamation of all sorts, really. I'm cherry picking is what I'm trying to say. So it's a bit of this and a bit of that as it suits me, as I feel that it best suits the restoration of this model. Yeah, those transitional colours are beautiful, aren't they? Yeah, so if you're using all-clad, you just have to bear in mind that it can be really, really volatile if you don't use it properly, or if you remove your masks too soon. It's better to let the lacquers cure for at least 2 or 3 days. The longer you leave it, the better. Everything's set. Everything is solid then in terms of a foundation. And there's many steps that you have to adhere to, or I have to adhere to, in terms of achieving a desired painted effect as opposed to a T-Col one. And I'm not knocking anyone by saying that. You can really appreciate the detail on the strong back as it stands out against the stark brightness of the micro fine filler. Trying to get this all in focus, it's not easy. In this profile you can appreciate the complexity that is the strong back. It is a little darker than perhaps what people are accustomed to. But the reason why I've gone with the darker tone or hue is that post-production tends to wash out colours and certain aspects of the production model. Also referring to the Christie's auction catalogue, again flash photography can wash out an image or wash out the colours of the subject. Again, I've used all-clad microfine primer. This is the primer that unfortunately I had a terrible reaction with in terms of it not meshing with the automotive primer that's underneath. The automotive primer is self-leveling, self-etching, as is the all-clad. But all-clad can be very, very volatile if not used carefully. You can have beautiful results with it, but at the same time it can catch you off guard. As you will see, But the paint scheme on the Enterprise in all her incarnations is pretty much stunning. It is stunning. When I say that this is a Voyage Home representation of the Enterprise, in many ways she's not. And the reason why I say this is because the Star Trek 4 iteration of the Enterprise, her colour scheme was muted. It was dulled down because the iridescence that was initially laid down interfered with this blue screen technology which ILM use. And basically when it came to Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, they had major issues, so they had to apply a dull coat, overspray most of the iridescence so that they could composite her into their special effects, basically. My warp nacelles are all masked up. I'm applying the paint in thin strips, and the reason why I'm doing this is because there's an undulation in the plastic, and this prohibits me from actually working with fine strips of tape, because I then incorporate that unevenness into the paint app, which I really don't want. So by using thicker strips of masking tape, I negate or avoid the issue of that undulation or inconsistent strip that I'm looking for. I'm also using a darker tone in terms of the chiller grill warp drive warp nacelle effect, and the reason why this is, it's a common misconception that it's a blue tone or hue, when really it's more of a lilac or indigo or purple. It's not the blue that we all see in modern Star Trek. It's a bit of a fallacy. It's a bit like the Klingon bird of prey. In post, she's completely green, but if you look at the production photographs and the Christie's photographs, you realise that the bird of prey is a myriad of hues and greens and blues and reds and rusts. All that is lost in post-production, unfortunately. It was sustained using the All-Clad microfine primer. It had an adverse reaction with the automotive primer underneath, and then the All-Clad lacquers on top of that. So the paintwork in essence was scrubbed. I had to start all over again. It was a moment of deep thought, so to speak. I had to rethink my strategy in terms of applying these lacquers. In the following images, you can see the refit during the Christie's auctions, And you can also see how the studio lighting and camera flash has washed out those colours. They look quite bleached out. So as I was saying earlier on, how I apply my paints are slightly darker in hue and tone. So in the colour scheme of things, I have chosen a slightly darker palette. As I was saying, it's just to compensate basically for the bright lights and the flash photography, which can wash out the richness. Now something completely different. This is Bandai's 1/144 scale Slave One. It's Boba Fett's fire spray, as we all know. This kit I bought off a gentleman. It was advertised as used, but upon receipt I realised that his definitions of use was pretty much broken, but hey, it's not a whinge. So what I did here in this particular picture, I used brass rods to reinforce the broken strut that's attached to the repulsor lift fin. The guns were also badly damaged. They were broken, in fact they were snapped, so I had to rebuild them. It was an interesting fix, not in that the model was broken in itself, but the fact that the stress tolerances in Bandai's models are quite intriguing. There's this tension and counter tension in the kit itself, which we have to accommodate. Yes, it's something of a stew, trying to get these surfaces to dovetail and blend in. Because of the tension and counter tension that's inbuilt into each Bandai model, it creates an issue in that you can't prise those parts from each other. And the reason why it's a risky procedure, because these parts are really quite delicate. The detail is so fine, you risk incurring a lot of damage to your very expensive kit, and that nobody really wants. I mean, you know, you don't exactly buy a kit to trash it, but excuse me, the tolerances are really quite variable, and they tend to push parts out of alignment, and aesthetically that's not really what you want in terms of your kit. See if we can get a little bit closer here. Yeah. So you can see on this port side panel, just below the cabin canopy or the cockpit canopy. So that plate there, which is just above the cowling that shields the repulsor lift strut and the repulsor lift fin, you can see how that part there is just out of alignment. Now, it's not just on this model, it's on other builds that I've watched online. So I know that the gentleman who built this model had the same issues as many other model builders have online, in that the fit issues is just well, it's just naff really. Not meaning to sound disrespectful, but yeah, if you've got panels that are out of place, it doesn't blend into the overall aesthetic of the model that we're trying to build. There's a lot of work to do still. The repulsor lift strut has styrene stock which I've applied over the brass rod fitting to effect a repair of that strut, so that's completely reinforced now. So once, let's get in here, focus. So once that's been finessed and blended in, it shouldn't look so out of place, especially when it's airbrushed. Turn that around, I faced the same issue with the cannons. They were snapped, so I used 5mm thick white styrene stock to blend in with broken parts. So basically I grafted styrene stock and the existing remnants of the kit parts together, and once I've airbrushed that, hopefully it shouldn't be too much of an issue, and that to the onlooker those parts will not look so out of place, in that I've made an effective repair. On the underside of the slave one, in this section here, I used 0.5, or it might be a little bit thicker gauge styrene stock to repair the antennae there. So again, once that's been airbrushed, it'll be blended in, it'll be perfect. Well, I hope it'll be perfect. Let's get this in focus here. As for the chassis of the Slave 1, it's not quite finished in terms of the paintwork. The gentleman who I bought this of used a lighter green for the chassis and undercarriage. If you look at the ILM model, you'll see that this section of the kit is actually a darker green, and under that you can see where the modelers have basically created a worn effect. You can see aspects of silver and a different blend of different hues underneath that dark green, and that's what I'll be doing in terms of my painting application. So I'm going to bring that more into line with what we can see on the studio scale model that was used for filming. Also, the engine shroud is a little bit more worn than what we see here, so again, I will be weathering that, so it's more akin to the screen used model. And the repulsor fins, they need to be airbrushed also. So it's a lovely kit. It's lovely, but unless you turn her over. So unless you like your kit very wee, very small, she is a little bit too small for her size, basically, and the level of detail, if that makes sense. If we're going to talk pounds and pence, the Phi Mold model kit, which is obviously bigger, being at 1/72 as opposed to 1/144, is a much better buy. And having bought those 20 years ago, and I have those in my collection, in my stash, they're far more appealing in terms of value for money. I mean, obviously now, 20 years down the road, those very same models go for hundreds of pounds online in terms of resale, but this kit, when it was initially released, was a £30 kit, and the reason why I didn't buy this kit initially, because I thought, well, it's a tiny kit, it's really wee, and for £30, in spite of the ingenuity and craftsmanship of the Bandai crew, I just think she is still too small, really, for the money. But then I imagine, like the Bandai Millennium Falcon, for example, if they made a 1/71 scale kit of this, I suppose we'd probably be talking about £200 or £300. But given the level of detail, and if it was a 1/72 scale kit, I would happily, put my cash down on the counter and say, yeah, I'll have one of those. But I inherited this. I bought her second hand just to see what the hullabaloo was about. So yes, once I get on with those painting apps, she should look quite the job. But in terms of scale, if you just bear with me a moment, I'll get a fine mould model to compare. Actually, before we talk fine moulds, with regards to the fit issues in the Bandai kits, what I'm going to do in terms of my other Bandai models, I'm going to trim the fixtures and fittings so that when assembling them, they will go together pretty much like a ordinary fine molds or MPC model. So the reason why I thought I would do this would be to mitigate any disasters in terms of having to disassemble or reassemble parts, especially the very fine, delicate and myriad parts that are associated with a Bandai model kit. So by by trimming those fixtures and fittings, I will hopefully avoid the issue with regards to assembly. I know that many other modelers would say, oh, well, they don't have an issue with Bandai kits, and fair play. But from my experience and looking at this, and I have a small AT-AT as well, which I bought second hand, and I can see whereby, in terms of the assembly of the kits I have, I will have to definitely trim the fixtures and fittings and glue the finer detail on, because not only is they're delicate, as I've repeatedly said, I wouldn't want to necessarily lose those parts, because basically the carpet is vast and infinite in terms of its own universe. So if you ping a part or drop a part, the likelihood of you finding it again being Bandai, a Bandai part, it will be pretty much 300 to 1 in terms of relocating or finding that part. So yeah. Anyway, on to the fine mold kit. Okay, we're back. The size comparison is obvious, and well, folks might say, well, it is obvious because the Bandai kit is 1/144 and the fine molds is 1/72. But what I'm demonstrating is basically not only a size comparison, but a comparison that's financially linked in terms of the price markup on both kits. So, as I've mentioned, the fine molds kit 20 years ago was £30, and when the Slave 1 kit issued by Bandai first hit the stores, that was £30 also. So it might seem like a very churlish whinge in terms of such a comparison, but you've really got to, or I have to ask myself, given such a disparity between the two in terms of size, and then the same amount of money outlay just for the kit, no tools, no paints, no nothing. It's it's an obvious choice, really. And even the older MPC and Airfix Slave 1 kits would be in many ways infinitely preferable to a Bandai one, especially if you make it more accurate, referring to the ILM photographic stock or reference books. So yeah, it might seem like an uncharitable whinge. Gosh, I'm stuttering there. Yeah, it does seem like an uncharitable whinge, but for my pocket and for my particular sensibilities, the 1/72 scale Slave 1 is not only a wiser and common sense choice for the pocket, in terms of her size, she's just the right size to display. Well, for me to display, because I don't have an infinite amount of room to display these things. So a 1/72nd scale Slave 1 is just the perfect size, really, and economically, yeah. The Bandai kit might be more faithful to the ILM studio production model, especially given Bandai's fastidiousness for the detail that they do apply throughout their range. But it's nothing that can't be built into a 5 moles model and an Airfix MBC model, albeit for the latter it would probably require much more work and ingenuity, but that is what model making is about. It's not it's you can either go out and make for a more accurate representation, or you can just build out the box, so you have the best of both worlds. But the Bandai kit for me is too small, and this is really going to sound really uncharitable, but it's over engineered. Yeah, and Bandai kits tend to be over engineered when they really don't need to be, especially for their size. I mean, you could buy a 1/72nd scale Dragon model kit, and it doesn't have any of this. They just don't have this sort of feature where everything's just so. And I think that's where the money might lie in terms of how they produce these kits as well. So anyway, enough of that, and on to something different. Okay, so this is my Sentry Space 1999 1/72nd scale die-cast laboratory eagle. While this is not strictly a model kit, she's still a die-cast model, if that makes sense. My wife had bought me 2 of these. She had bought me the Rescue Eagle, which everybody knows, with the red banding around the cargo pod. And this one, well, unfortunately, rather strangely, this model took a tumble off our 6x7 bookcase in the living room. So one November morning, woke up and unfortunately this model was on the deck in, well, dozens of pieces. Well, not the front half, her rear section, which is basically the engine bells and all the fuel lines. This is a first edition Eagle, and all the first edition Eagles, to my knowledge, basically have a grey plastic body which has been airbrushed over with an insignia white, or a variant of that tone or hue of paint. Unfortunately, such was the damage that I'd say a good percentage of the structure here was lost. Again, as I always like to say, the carpet is a vast and infinite universe. So once you get small parts and they they enter the realm of the vast carpet. It's like Narnia. You're not going to find your way back. Or in terms of finding these pieces, they're well and truly down the rabbit hole, so to speak. So, what I did, as you have no doubt seen in the slideshow, is that I used fine brass rod to reconstruct some of the fuel lines and the fuel pods. I drilled out those broken parts so that I could knit them back together. And also I used 10mm stock gauge styrene to reconstruct basically the larger elements in the engine bell assembly. So it was quite a do, and being so shocked and disheartened at the damage that this model has sustained, I just put her away in a drawer for a few months till I actually built up the courage to tackle this, because I thought, well, I don't really want to bin this model. I don't want to. She's just too special, especially as my wife had bought them for me. So I really did not want to throw this model away. And given that I scratch built an Imperial probe droid with working legs and pistons, well, I thought, well, maybe I could apply the same techniques in terms of reconstructing these parts. So this cage area where you can see the grey plastic underneath, this part of the model was actually fractured, but I teased the part back into place, and I used a mixture of epoxy resin to keep the structures in place, and then I went over the break with super glue. So the super glue acts as a glaze, and as it's not actually connecting, a female and male part, or a part that is going to be manipulated, that glaze has now become a part of this structure, and is also filled in any really, I mean, we're talking hair fine cracks or fissures. So we have the double strength of the epoxy resin glue, and then the glaze of the super glue over top, which is acted as a filler, which is really advantageous in this circumstance. Let's turn her over on her back. Right, let's get this into focus. Now, these die casts are manufactured in China, and you can see where I've used a bit of milliput there as well. But as I was saying, these models, these die casts are manufactured in China, and it's only through reassembling and rebuilding the broken parts you realise that you think, yeah, the Chinese kind of basically bang these out. It's like then the craftsmanship in terms of quality isn't quite there. But I've only learnt that through this die cast having such an unfortunate accident. But I am again. I am rather grateful that the Anderson legacy has lived on through the love of Space 1999, and I've always loved Space 1999 as a child, although I did find quite some of it to be quite frightening, especially one episode in particular, and that's the Dragon's Domain. I mean, that scared me witless, but it still does. But yeah, getting back to this. Yeah, so I basically rebuilt it in an afternoon, but it was only after, a few months of her being put away in a drawer, and then thinking about how I might address the damage and rebuild her, and yeah, it was fine. Sometimes if you think about certain things too much, it's more of a hindrance rather than being progressive in terms of what needs to be done and how it should be done. So yeah, again, like the Slave One, once I've airbrushed the parts with the correct blend of paints, it is my hope that the damage will be unnoticeable. Again, things are never perfect when you reassemble them, but I think in terms of this diecast, and then referring back to the Slave One, I think the job's going to be a good one once we get stuck in there with the airbrush, and yeah, so hopefully she'll be able to return to her pride of place back on top of the bookcase, but she might compete for some spaces. There are other bits and bobs that have been bought since and put on display, but yeah. So if anyone's got a broken eagle out there, don't throw her in the bin. She can be repaired, and yeah, just yep. There is always hope. Yeah. So that's a little foray into repairing die-cast models. As I mentioned the Pro Droid, I thought I would just do a quickie presentation basically, and that's just to demonstrate, and get my hands there, that the pistons work. He's actually fully posable. So he's a working maquette, so to speak. I built this 20 years ago. I was actually going to get it made into a kit, but Sideshow beat me to it, and other model makers and manufacturers beat me to it, and then Hasbro recently with their Pro Droid toy, which is basically the same scale as this, so I suppose mine is about Star Wars figure sized, or Star Wars figure scale, and that's 1 3 inches, something like that. But this maquette or model is comprised of 2,000 hand sculpted parts, and he's basically made from Fimo and Milliput. So those are the mediums or media that I used to build this model. The legs are of Milliput, the joints are Milliput, brass screws and styrene, along with the brass pistons that, as I've demonstrated, are fully posable. That's his torque arm there. Yeah. Really quite detailed, as you can see. I really sculpted this to see if I could actually articulate the legs, and I really wanted to understand how the model makers at ILM managed to produce such an amazing looking droid, sinister droid. But yes, I really wanted to understand the articulation. The claws are articulated too, but I haven't got my pincers to widen them. I can't do that with my fingers. I'm not going to damage this maquette. It's quite heavy, as you can see. Really quite heavy. But yeah, so several companies and artisans beat me to it, so he's just another test of my modelling capabilities and my love of the genre that is model making and maquette making. So yeah, that's a Probe Droid quickie really. It might not be the last time that we hear or see of a Probe Droid. Who knows? But I bet you it isn't friendly whatever it is. Okay, so what we have here is a half studio scale Narcissus EEV. You can see how large the scratch build is in comparison to the 1990s Halcyon Models styrene injection kit. The scratch build Narcissus is half studio scale. It's comprised of a high impact polystyrene acrylic or a type of perspex. It's hard wearing, it's quite durable, and it'll take a lot of punishment in terms of handling, but as with all materials, it can only be handled so much during construction. The other elements that you see applied on top of that acrylic is ordinary styrene stock. It's of various thicknesses between 0.5 and 10 millimeters thick. The surface of the Narcissus isn't, how can I say, uniform. It's very stepped, so you have different tiers and very different levels in terms of the surface detail. As of now, we're nearly in the thousands in terms of the detail application, the styrene parts. None of this is being laser cut, none of it's being 3D printed. It's all being hand cut like how the original 1979 model was as it was depicted in the film. And try and get you in focus. I really need a camera that's capable of autofocus rather than this manual It's manual finicking and faffing around really. But yes, the EEV is a beautiful design. It's a lovely model, and this one's quite substantial. Like the original studio model, it will have a steel armature. This will help to reinforce the model, and also it helps in terms of providing a conduit for the wiring and the lighting. And the lighting I'm doing myself. The interior of the Narcissus will be based on the one-to-one studio prop, in that you will have a flight deck, hypersleep pods, and a console towards the middle and aft of the shuttle. It's intriguing, the auxiliary EV engines, which is at the prow or the fore of the vessel. That alone so far is comprised of 80 parts. The Narcissus is not a conventional vessel in terms of its geometry. It's really quite unique. Okay, this is the underside of the Narcissus. You can appreciate the level of detail and intricacy that is demonstrated throughout the build of this half-scale studio scratch build. The detail apps are absolutely stunning, and has nothing to do with regards to my building this model. It's just in the bone design basically. I can only humbly follow what's gone before in terms of this model's construction. The interior will also feature a Ripley, a Xenomorph, and a Jonesy figure to accommodate the level of detail that I intend for the flight deck and the Narcissus's cabin. I have yet to apply the engines, and they'll be cast or moulded. I haven't quite decided which avenue to go down yet. All the additional detail will be handmade, handcrafted. I won't be using kit bash parts. I don't have that sort of bottomless pit in terms of available funds, and I don't believe in sacrificing model kits to build something else. It's just not in my modelling DNA to do that. So I'd rather handcraft any additional bits and bobs. Yeah, you can really appreciate the size of this model, this build. There's a slight asymmetry to this build. There's a slight asymmetry, and I have followed the templates that I have to the letter, and because of this asymmetry it tends to chafe a bit in that my dyslexia, my autism craves, how can I say, craves symmetry, and yeah, it was difficult to get my head round. Beautiful, isn't she? Yeah, what a beautiful, beautiful design. I'll flip her over. Let's see if we can get a decent shot of the boarding airlock. These openings that you see adjacent to the airlock, that's where the engines will be attached and where the wiring and LEDs will be channeled through to light the engines. This is a closer look at the boarding airlock. So far my client is really pleased with the progress of his commission. I've taken something of a wee while to build this model because I'm battling with illness, unfortunately, but while I'm able, I'm ploughing along, so to speak. This hatch here alone, or this back section of the Narcissus, is comprised of at least 80 parts alone. And the reason why there is such a high part count, it's primarily due to the stepped feature of the airlock hatch. Again, like the bulk of the Narcissus's surface detail, it's not a uniform flat surface. It's tiered and multi-leveled. In many ways it's almost like a Star Destroyer, because a Star Destroyer has many tiers even on what appears to be just a flat surface. There are pits and there are elevations. Here's a nice view of the fore section, or the bow, so to speak. I keep my cabin canopies masked because I really don't want to get them damaged, scratched, or get glue on them, because that's going to involve an awful lot of tidying up. So during the construction the masking tape will be kept on, or if I remove the masking tape I will reapply a fresh mask, so that again it will be to keep that clean, tidy. Let's zoom in here. Yeah, look at that detail, that's just incredible, isn't it? Let's just think it'd focus properly. Yeah, it's fantastic, the level of detail. And this is just the styrene. This is not all the intricate conduits or pipework or anything like that. Here we have the decal set for the Narcissus. Not many people realise that the decals are actually quite an involved aspect in terms of detailing the Narcissus. The original builders used an awful lot of the Second World War Airfix models decal sets to create that lived in universe aesthetic in terms of applying that aspect to the model that they built. This is a 100% accurate and faithful copy of that decal set in terms of what was used back in the day, so to speak. I've had several of these made up for me because I thought, well, if I damage something during the application, I'll have a backup. But also, if I was to build another Narcissus of this scale or larger, I would have these decals as a template in place to hit the ground running, so to speak. Yeah, really quite astounding, the detail in these decals. It's just amazing when you look at it. Right then, well, that's that for this little brief update or interlude.